I'm Alex Mitchell. I'm 22 years old, and on the night of my college graduation, my own father stood up in front of my entire family and announced he was cutting me off for good. Before I tell you about the sealed envelope I handed him that made his face turn ghost white, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The air in Bellamy's, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, was thick with the scent of money and roasted duck. It was supposed to be my night. After 4 years of juggling a double major and a part-time job that left my hands smelling like stale coffee and bleach, I had graduated summa cum laude, top of my class. A piece of paper that was supposed to mean something. The celebration wasn't my idea. It was my grandmother, Martha's. She was the only reason my parents, Richard and Eleanor, were even there. They sat across the polished mahogany table from me, their smiles as thin and brittle as a layer of ice on a puddle. My father, Richard, looked at his watch every 5 minutes. My mother, Eleanor, was busy admiring the new bracelet on my Aunt Patricia's wrist, her sister. And then there was my brother, Ethan, 19 years old, the golden child, the football star who coasted through high school on a gentleman's C average and my father's donations to the athletic department. He sat next to his girlfriend, Megan, a smirk playing on his lips all night. He knew, just like I knew, that this whole dinner was a performance, a show for my grandmother. I tried to focus on the good things. My roommate, Derek, was there, giving me a thumbs up from across the table. My girlfriend, Sophia, had her hand on my knee, a silent anchor in a turbulent sea. And my grandmother, Martha, sat beside me, her eyes, though clouded with age, shining with a pride that felt like the only real thing in the room. The main course had been cleared. The waiter was approaching with a dessert menu. That's when my father stood up. He tapped his wine glass with a fork, the sharp ping cutting through the restaurant's low hum. Nearby tables quieted down, their occupants pretending not to listen. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying the cold authority he usually reserved for board meetings. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room. "We are here to mark an occasion, an ending." A chill went down my spine. Sophia's hand tightened on my leg. He finally turned his eyes to me, and they were like chips of granite. "Eleanor and I have had a long discussion. We've decided you're not part of this family anymore. Alex, you've never embraced our values, our traditions. You've always been a disappointment. So, from today, you're on your own." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me. I saw Ethan's smirk widen into a full-blown grin. My mother nodded slowly in agreement, her face a mask of cold indifference. For a split second, my vision blurred. I felt a hot, metallic taste in my mouth. My hands, hidden under the table, balled into fists so tight my knuckles ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to expose them for the frauds they were, right there in their favorite restaurant in front of their wealthy friends. But I didn't. I had been preparing for this. I just didn't think it would be so public, so cruel. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my hands to relax. I looked up at my father, whose face was set in a triumphant scowl. I gave him a small, calm smile. "Congratulations on your honesty, Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Then, I reached into the inside pocket of my new suit jacket, a suit I'd bought myself, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I slid it across the table until it stopped right in front of his plate. He stared at it, confused. I stood up, leaned over, and kissed my grandmother's soft, wrinkled cheek. "I love you, Grandma," I whispered, for her ears only. I turned, took my graduation cap off the chair beside me, and placed it deliberately in the center of the table. A final statement. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. I just walked, my back straight, my head held high, leaving the silence, the shock, and the sealed envelope behind me. The Boston spring air felt like a slap in the face as I pushed through the heavy oak doors of Bellamy's. But it was a welcome one. It was real, unlike the suffocating charade I had just left behind. To understand what was in that envelope, you have to understand the last 4 years, and more importantly, the last 3 months. My family didn't just dislike my choices. They resented my very existence. It started when I chose to major in finance and computer science instead of business administration at the state university my father had attended. "Finance is for number crunchers, Alex," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The Mitchells are leaders, not accountants." What he meant was the Mitchells played golf and signed checks. They didn't code until 3 a.m. or build predictive financial models for fun. That was my world. Ethan's world was the football field. When he was named starting quarterback for his high school team, my father bought him a brand new Mustang. When I made the dean's list for the 4th consecutive semester, my father asked if my little computer hobby was distracting me from making real connections. The financial arrangement was a constant, simmering source of humiliation. My parents had set up a college fund, but they always forgot to transfer the money for my tuition or rent on time. I'd have to make the same humiliating phone call every few months. "Hi, Mom." The landlord was asking about the rent again. There would be a heavy sigh on the other end of the line, as if I were asking for a favor and not what was rightfully mine. "We're busy, Alex. I'll get to it when I can." After my sophomore year, I stopped asking. I got a job waiting tables at a diner near campus. I worked 20 hours a week, coming home with sore feet and the smell of fried onions clinging to my clothes. I'd shower and then study until my eyes burned, fueled by the cheap, bitter coffee I'd bring home in a thermos. I remember one night, I was hunched over my laptop, debugging a piece of code, when a picture popped up on social media. It was Ethan, on a yacht in the Caribbean for spring break, a picture my mother had proudly shared with the caption, "My boy, living his best life." I looked at his carefree smile, then at my own reflection in the dark screen. Pale, tired, with dark circles under my eyes. The gap between us wasn't just a difference in personality. It was a chasm. The only person who really saw me, was my grandmother, Martha. When my father complained about my unsociable major, she'd pat my hand and say, "The world is changing, Richard. Our Alex is smart. He's ahead of the curve." She couldn't follow the technical details of my projects, but she'd listen for hours, her head cocked to one side, asking questions that were surprisingly insightful. She never missed a chance to slip me a $50 bill when my parents weren't looking. "For your books, dear," she'd whisper. "Or just to take Sophia out for a nice dinner. You deserve it." She was my anchor, my champion, the one person whose opinion mattered. And they were trying to take everything from her. The discovery happened 3 months before graduation. Grandma Martha had called me in a bit of a panic. She'd had a small fall. She was fine, just a bruised hip, but it had made her realize her paperwork was a mess. She asked if I could help her organize her financial statements. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," she said. "And your father is always too busy." I spent a Saturday afternoon at her quiet, sun-filled condo, a place that always smelled faintly of lavender and old books. We sat at her kitchen table, a stack of manila folders between us. At first, it was just standard stuff, utility bills, bank statements, pension documents. But then I opened a folder labeled Mitchell Family Investments. Inside, things didn't add up. There were large, recurring withdrawals. $20,000 here, $50,000 there. Labeled EM Venture Capital, RM Project Loan, EM Ethan Mitchell, RM Richard Mitchell. My stomach turned to ice. Ethan didn't have a venture. He was spending his time at football practice and frat parties. My father's projects usually involved a new set of golf clubs or a business trip to a 5-star resort. I started digging deeper, cross-referencing dates. A $50,000 withdrawal for Ethan's venture happened the same week he posted pictures of his new jet ski. A $100,000 loan to my father coincided with the down payment on my parents' new Mercedes. They were systematically draining her accounts. "Grandma," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what are these withdrawals?" She squinted at the paper I showed her. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Richard told me that was to move some money around for tax purposes. He said it was too complicated for me to understand. He had me sign some papers a while back. Gave him power of attorney. He said it would make things easier to manage if, something happened to me." My blood ran cold. They had convinced this trusting, 82-year-old woman to sign over legal control of her life savings, and they were treating it like their personal ATM. Then she looked at me, her eyes sharper than I'd seen them in years. "I'm not as foolish as they think, Alex," she said, her voice low and steady. She reached for her knitting bag on the chair beside her and pulled out a small, digital voice recorder, the kind a student would use for lectures. "I bought this a few months ago. Your father, he's been pressuring me to change my will, to leave everything to Ethan. He said you were unreliable and would squander it." She pressed play, and I heard my father's voice, slick and condescending. "Mom, you're getting confused in your old age. Just sign here. It's for the best. You don't need to read all that legal nonsense." Then my mother's voice, syrupy sweet. "Eleanor, we just want to make sure Ethan is taken care of. He's the future of this family. Alex can take care of himself." The recording went on. It was damning. It was sickening. It was everything I needed. "They think I don't see how they treat you," Grandma Martha said, her eyes wet with tears. "They think I don't see the man you've become. The good, honest man." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I will not let them do this to you, or to me." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in front of my laptop, the rage inside me so cold and sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. It was about protecting the one person in my family who had ever protected me. The next day, I made an appointment with Howard Winters. He was a name I'd found on one of Grandma's old legal documents, listed as her personal attorney for over 30 years. He was a semi-retired, no-nonsense lawyer with a small office downtown. I walked into his office, a bundle of nerves and righteous fury. I laid out the bank statements. I told him about the power of attorney. And then I played him the recording. Howard, who had been listening with a professionally detached expression, leaned forward. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He listened to the entire 20-minute recording in silence. When it was over, he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in his old eyes. "The vultures," he said, his voice a low growl. "I've seen this before, son. Elder financial abuse. It's one of the ugliest things there is." I expected him to be hesitant, to warn me about the complexities of fighting my own family. Instead, he looked at me with a newfound respect. "Your grandmother is a sharp woman for recording that," he said. "And you're a good grandson for bringing this to me. But are you ready for what comes next? This is going to be a war, Alex. It's going to be ugly." I looked him straight in the eye. "They were going to put her in a cheap care facility once her money was gone, Howard. They called her a burden in an email I found." The memory of that word, burden, sent a fresh wave of fury through me. "I'm ready," I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it before. "Tell me what we need to do." The next 3 months were a blur of secret meetings, photocopied documents, and hushed phone calls. With Howard's guidance, Grandma Martha signed a new set of documents. The first revoked Richard and Eleanor's power of attorney, effective immediately. The second appointed me as her new financial guardian. Howard began preparing the formal complaint for elder financial abuse, using the bank statements and the recordings as ironclad evidence. The biggest secret, the one that I held closest to my chest, was something Howard discovered while reviewing the deed to my family's sprawling home. The one my father always proudly called the Mitchell estate. It turned out my grandfather had put the house in a trust, with my grandmother as the sole trustee and beneficiary. It was never my father's to inherit or to promise to Ethan. It was, and always had been, Grandma Martha's property. And in her new, legally sound will, she had designated it, along with the remainder of her estate, to me. We put all the notarized documents, all the proof, all the power, into a single cream-colored envelope. We were just waiting for the right moment. My father, in his arrogance, had provided the perfect stage. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, to cast me out in a grand, dramatic gesture. He had no idea that he wasn't writing the end of my story. He was writing the beginning of his. The heavy door of Bellamy's swung shut behind me, muffling the stunned silence inside. For a moment, I just stood on the sidewalk, the cool Boston night air filling my lungs. It was the first clean breath I'd taken all evening. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt quiet, the calm in the eye of a hurricane I had just unleashed. Sophia and Derek came out a minute later. Sophia rushed to my side, her face a mixture of shock and concern. "Alex, are you okay? I can't believe he did that." Derek clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Man, that was the most savage exit I have ever seen. What was in that envelope?" "The truth," I said, my voice still hoarse. "Let's just go." I didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. The first move had been made, but the war was just beginning. We were halfway down the block when we heard the restaurant door slam open again. "Alex!" It was my father's voice, but it was different. The cold, commanding tone was gone. This was the sound of pure, panicked rage. I stopped but didn't turn around. I heard his expensive leather shoes slapping against the pavement as he ran to catch up. He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. His face, which had been smug and arrogant just 10 minutes earlier, was now a mask of disbelief and fury. His complexion was pale, almost gray, under the streetlights. He was waving the documents from the envelope. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "What is this legal garbage? Revocation of power of attorney? You can't do this." I looked at him, at the man who had called me a disappointment his entire life. I felt nothing but a cold, hard pity. "I didn't do it, Dad," I said calmly. "Grandma did. She signed it. It's all legal and binding. Howard Winters filed it this afternoon." His eyes widened in disbelief. "Winters? He's my mother's lawyer, not yours." "He's her lawyer," I corrected him, "and his only duty is to his client. You and Mom stopped being her primary concern the moment you started treating her savings account like your personal slush fund." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "How dare you? We were managing her assets. You were stealing from an 82-year-old woman." I shot back, my own anger finally starting to surface. "You were stealing from your own mother, and she knows. She recorded you. We have it all." The color drained completely from his face. The hand holding the papers dropped to his side. He looked from me to the documents, his mind clearly struggling to process the full scope of the disaster. He saw the petition to make me her financial guardian. He saw the draft of the criminal complaint citing elder financial abuse. And then, his eyes must have landed on the final page, the copy of the trust document for the house. "The estate," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "The house. It's in her name." "It always was," I said. "And now she's leaving it to me. You have no power here anymore, Dad. Not over her money, and not over me." He just stood there, speechless, the papers fluttering in the slight breeze. The patriarch, the king of the castle, had just found out his castle was made of sand, and the tide was coming in. I turned and walked away, Sophia and Derek flanking me like a protective detail. This time he didn't follow. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't a public explosion. It was a quiet, insidious implosion of their carefully constructed world. My father didn't go back into the restaurant and cause a scene. He, my mother, and Ethan must have slipped out the back, because when Aunt Patricia called me an hour later, they were already gone. The first hint of the real trouble came the next day. It was a call to my father from the president of the Oak Ridge Country Club, a place my father revered more than most churches, a place where reputation is everything. Another family who had been dining at Bellamy's that night, a prominent Boston investor and his wife, had apparently been friends with the club president. They had seen the whole thing, the public disowning, my calm departure, and Richard's panicked exit. The club president informed my father that his membership was being reviewed pending an investigation into some troubling rumors. For a man like my father, that was a social death sentence. The phone calls started coming to me, too. Uncle James, my father's younger, more reasonable brother, called me that night. "Alex," he said, his voice heavy. "Patricia just told me what happened. I'm disgusted. I'm not surprised, but I'm disgusted. Whatever you need, son, you call me. You've always been a good kid. Then came the most unexpected call. Aunt Patricia. I was expecting a lecture, a demand that I apologize and fix this mess. Instead, she sounded flustered, almost nervous. Alex, she said, your father is losing his mind. He's saying you've manipulated your grandmother. But I saw his face tonight, and I saw yours. He's been treating you like dirt for years. She took a deep breath. I'm on your side. Don't you let him bully you. The real bombshell, however, came from the one person I expected to be my staunchest enemy. 2 days after the dinner, there was a frantic pounding on my apartment door. It was Ethan. He didn't look like the smirking prince I had seen at the restaurant. He looked terrified. His hair was a mess, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing the same clothes from 2 nights ago. You have to stop this, he blurted out the second I opened the door. Dad's going crazy. My credit cards were declined. They said the account is frozen. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Ethan, I said, blocking the doorway. This is the consequence of your and their actions. Our actions? I didn't do anything, he yelled, his voice cracking. Dad handled all the money stuff. He said it was our inheritance. He said you were trying to steal it from me. And you believed him? I asked, my voice cold. Of course I believed him. You've always been jealous of me. I almost laughed. Jealous? Of what, Ethan? Your C-average? The fact that you haven't worked a real day in your life? I was never jealous. I was just invisible. He deflated, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a desperate panic. Look, bro, he said, his tone shifting. We can work this out. Talk to Grandma. Tell her to unfreeze the accounts. I'll pay you back. Or something. It's too late for that, Ethan. This isn't about money anymore. It's about what's right. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Then he did something that changed everything. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through it. He's been playing us, he whispered. All this time. He held up the phone. It was a text chain between him and my father. I saw my own name over and over. Dad, make sure you don't mention the new boat to Alex. He'll just get resentful and run to your grandmother. Dad, Alex called about his tuition again. Don't worry, I'll handle it. We need to keep that money liquid for your business venture. And the worst one, from 6 months ago. Dad, your brother is snooping around your grandmother's finances. He's trying to cut you out of the will. We have to move faster. I need you to talk to Grandma. Tell her how much you're counting on her support. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. They hadn't just stolen from my grandmother. They had systematically and maliciously poisoned my relationship with my own brother, turning him into a pawn in their greedy game. They had built a wall of lies between us since we were kids. Ethan looked up from the phone, and for the first time I didn't see a rival. I saw another victim, a more favored victim, a more pampered one, but a victim nonetheless. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. I swear to God, Alex, I didn't know they were doing that to Grandma. I just thought you hated me. I didn't know what to say. The neat lines of my war, the clear distinction between good and evil, had just been blurred. My enemy wasn't just my parents and my brother. It was the web of manipulation they had spun around all of us. I looked at my brother, this stranger who had slept in the room next to mine for 18 years. The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks, Ethan, I said, my voice softer now. The court is going to decide whether to launch a full investigation and make the asset freeze permanent. If you really didn't know, you're going to have a chance to prove it. You're going to have to pick a side. I left him standing in the hallway of my apartment building, staring at the text messages that had defined his life. His face a mess of confusion, betrayal, and dawning horror. The storm had broken, and it was sweeping all of us away. The 2 weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were the longest of my life. The initial shockwave had passed, and now we were in the treacherous, murky waters of the storm itself. It wasn't a clean fight. It was a brutal, ugly war of whispers and accusations, and I was at the center of it. My parents, realizing they couldn't win on facts, switched to a classic tactic: character assassination. They launched a full-scale smear campaign, and their target was me. They started with the family. My mother would call relatives, crying, telling them how their troubled, resentful son was trying to take advantage of his confused, elderly grandmother. My father would follow up with a more rational call, explaining how I was unstable and had always been greedy, and that this was my ultimate play to steal the family fortune for myself. Some saw through it. Uncle James called me and warned me about what his brother was doing. "He's poisoning the well, Alex. Don't let it get to you." But not everyone was so discerning. I got a call from a great-aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, lecturing me on the importance of respecting my elders, meaning my parents. "Your father is a good man, Alex," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You should be ashamed of yourself." The worst call was from Aunt Patricia. The same woman who had pledged her support just days before now sounded uncertain. "Alex," she said, her voice hesitant. "Eleanor called me. She was distraught. She said you won't even let her speak to her own mother. Is that true? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Your grandmother. She has been a bit forgetful lately." The seed of doubt my parents had planted was starting to sprout. The insinuation hung in the air. Maybe I was the one manipulating things. The thought was so vile it made me feel sick. "They're the ones who won't let me talk to her, Aunt Patricia," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Because they know if she talks to anyone else, their lies will fall apart." Did Mom happen to mention the $50,000 venture capital for Ethan? Or the recordings? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "No," she said finally, her voice small. "She didn't mention that." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. They were trying to isolate me, to paint me as the villain in my own story. And for a terrifying moment, it felt like it was working. The strain started to show. I was barely sleeping. I spent my days at Howard's office, going over documents, preparing statements, and my nights staring at the ceiling of my apartment. The words of my relatives echoing in my head. Troubled, greedy, unstable. One evening, Sophia found me sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by piles of legal papers. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't even turned on the lights. "Alex?" she said softly, kneeling beside me. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. The dam of composure I had built around myself finally broke. "What if they're right, Soph?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "What if I'm wrong? I'm destroying my family. I'm taking my own parents to court. What kind of person does that?" "A person who is protecting his grandmother," she said firmly, taking my face in her hands. "A person who is standing up to bullies. You are not wrong, Alex. Don't you dare let them make you believe that." "But it's so ugly," I said, my voice cracking. "I hear their voices in my head. I have to see them in court. My own mother and father. The rage, the frustration, the sheer emotional exhaustion of it all came pouring out. "They were going to throw her away, Soph," I yelled, slamming my fist on the floor. "Like a piece of old furniture they were tired of. They called her a burden. Am I just supposed to let that happen? Am I supposed to stand by and watch while they bleed her dry and then ship her off to some hellhole to die alone?" Tears were streaming down my face now. Hot, angry tears. Sophia just held me, letting me vent all the poison that had been building up inside. "No," she whispered into my hair. "You're not. You're fighting. And that's why I love you. That's why Derek is here every day with food you don't eat. That's why Howard is working pro bono. That's why your Uncle James respects you. You are not alone in this, Alex. We are your family now." Her words were a lifeline. She was right. I wasn't just tearing down an old, rotten structure. I was building a new one, founded on loyalty and love, not blood and obligation. The next day, I walked into Howard's office with a renewed sense of purpose. We spent hours preparing for the hearing. We went over every bank statement, every withdrawal slip. We listened to the recordings again and again, marking the most damning phrases. "Mom, you're getting confused. Just sign here. It's for your own good." It was the voice of a predator, cloaked in the language of a concerned son. We also prepared for their attacks. Howard warned me. "Their lawyer is going to paint you as a disgruntled, greedy grandson. He's going to try and make this about your personal grievances, not your grandmother's welfare. You cannot react. You have to stay calm. You have to be the reasonable one in the room. Let the evidence speak for you." Ethan was the wild card. He had disappeared after our confrontation. He didn't answer my texts. I didn't know if he would show up at the hearing, or whose side he would take if he did. Part of me hoped he would do the right thing. Another, more cynical part of me expected him to crawl back to our parents the second they promised to turn his credit cards back on. The day before the hearing, a courier delivered a small package to my apartment. It was from Uncle James. Inside was a brand new tie, a simple, elegant navy blue silk. The note attached said only one thing: "They will try to make you look like a child. Don't let them. See you tomorrow." He was going to be there. In that moment, I knew I could face whatever they threw at me. The storm was still raging, but for the first time, I could see the light on the horizon. I wasn't just fighting against something anymore. I was fighting for something. For Grandma Martha, for my new family, and for the person I was determined to become. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and colder. It smelled of old paper and stale air conditioning. The polished wood of the benches felt hard and unforgiving. My parents sat at the opposing table, looking like strangers. My father was in his best suit, his face a stony mask of indignation. My mother sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a perfect portrait of a wronged matriarch. They had a slick, expensive-looking lawyer with silver hair and a crocodile skin briefcase. I sat with Howard, wearing the new tie from Uncle James. Felt like a piece of armor. In the public gallery behind me, I could see Sophia and Derek. And a few rows back, sitting by himself, was Uncle James. His presence was a silent statement of support that spoke volumes. Then, just as the bailiff called for us to rise, the courtroom doors opened one last time. It was Ethan. He looked thin and pale. He hesitated for a second, his eyes darting from our parents' table to mine. My mother gave him a small, pleading look. My father gave him a sharp, commanding nod. Ethan looked at me, his face unreadable. Then he walked to the back of the room and sat down, as far away from everyone as he could get. He hadn't chosen a side. He had chosen neutrality, which, in a war like this, felt like a betrayal all its own. The hearing began. My parents' lawyer, a man named Sterling, went first. He was smooth, articulate, and utterly reptilian. He painted a picture of a loving, concerned son and daughter-in-law who were simply trying to manage the complex finances of an aging parent. Then he turned his attention to me. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We have here a classic case of what is known as inheritance impatience. We have a grandson, Mr. Alex Mitchell, who, for years, has felt overlooked by his family. A young man with a chip on his shoulder." He walked towards our table. "This isn't about protecting Martha Mitchell. This is about revenge. Alex Mitchell has seen his younger brother receive, perhaps, more parental attention, and he has grown bitter. He has preyed on his grandmother's occasional memory lapses, filled her head with lies, and is now attempting a hostile takeover of her estate." Howard had warned me this was coming, but hearing the words out loud, in a court of law, still felt like a punch to the gut. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge, a stern-looking woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes. I did not look at my parents. I did not react. When it was Howard's turn, he didn't start with theatrics. He started with facts. He walked the judge through the bank statements one by one. A quiet, methodical presentation of numbers and dates. $50,000 withdrawn on April 12th for EM Venture Capital, Howard said, his voice calm and clear. On April 14th, Ethan Mitchell's social media shows him with a new jet ski. Coincidence? He continued. $100,000 loan to my father. followed 2 days later by a down payment on a luxury car. The pattern was undeniable. Sterling objected repeatedly, but the judge overruled him each time, her expression growing colder. "This is all circumstantial," Sterling blustered. Richard and Eleanor Mitchell had full authority under the power of attorney to manage these assets as they saw fit for the family's overall benefit. Did that overall benefit include providing for Mrs. Mitchell's welfare? Howard asked quietly. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I would now like to play a piece of evidence. A recording made by Martha Mitchell in her own home. A technician hooked up the digital recorder." My mother's face went pale. My father leaned forward and whispered furiously to his lawyer. Howard pressed play. The courtroom was silent as my father's condescending voice filled the air. "Mom, you're getting confused. Just sign here." Then my mother's voice equally damning. "We just want to make sure Ethan is taken care of." I chanced to look at my parents. My father's face was rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. My mother had stopped dabbing her eyes. She was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. In the back of the room, I saw Ethan sink lower in his seat, covering his face with his hands. When the recording ended, a heavy silence hung in the air. "As you can hear, Your Honor," Howard said, "this was not management. This was coercion." Sterling stood up, flustered but not defeated. "Your Honor, my clients were clearly speaking to a woman they love, trying to simplify complex matters for her. This recording proves nothing more than a family discussion, perhaps poorly worded, but with no malicious intent." The judge looked at Howard. "Do you have anything else, Mr. Winters?" This was it, the final move. "Just one more thing, Your Honor," Howard said. He walked over to our table and picked up a single sheet of paper. "This is a printout of an email, sent from Richard Mitchell's email address to Eleanor Mitchell's. It was discovered by Alex Mitchell on his grandmother's computer." He handed a copy to the judge and to my parents' lawyer. I knew the words by heart. I watched as the judge's eyes scanned the page. I saw her brow furrow, her lips tighten into a thin, hard line. Howard read it aloud for the court record. His voice was cold, precise, and unforgiving. Subject: the Martha problem. "Eleanor, we need to discuss the timeline. Once the Westridge account is fully liquidated, we need to start the process of moving her. I've looked into a few facilities. The one in Pinecrest is the most affordable. I know it's not the Ritz, but we can't afford to have her as a financial burden for the rest of our lives. We'll tell everyone it was her choice and that she's happier there." Burden. The word hung in the silent courtroom like a verdict. Sterling, the slick lawyer, had no response. He looked at the email, then at his client, his face a mixture of shock and disgust. He slowly sat down, his case, his career, and his clients' lives crumbling around him. The judge slowly took off her reading glasses. She looked at my parents, and her gaze was pure ice. All the sternness was gone, replaced by a contempt so profound it was almost palpable. She looked at Richard. She looked at Eleanor. "Malicious intent," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Seems to be the only thing that is perfectly clear today." My father finally broke. He slumped in his chair, a broken man, the mask of arrogance shattered into a million pieces. My mother let out a small, choked sob. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt a profound, aching sadness. And then, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. It was over. The truth was out. And it had been enough. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. She didn't mince words. "Effective immediately," she declared, her voice ringing with authority, "I am issuing a temporary injunction, freezing all assets held by Richard and Eleanor Mitchell, both jointly and individually. Furthermore, I am freezing all accounts related to the Mitchell Family Trust pending a full forensic accounting investigation to be conducted by a court-appointed independent guardian." My parents' lawyer tried to object, stammering something about draconian measures. But the judge cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "You're lucky, Mr. Sterling," she said, her eyes still locked on my parents, "that I am not holding your clients in contempt of court right now. The evidence presented today is, frankly, appalling. This court takes allegations of elder financial abuse with the utmost seriousness. She turned to me and Howard. The revocation of the prior power of attorney is validated. Mr. Alex Mitchell's appointment as financial guardian for Mrs. Martha Mitchell is approved on an interim basis. A follow-up hearing will be scheduled in 90 days to review the findings of the forensic accountant and make these orders permanent. She banged her gavel. We are adjourned. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. My parents sat motionless, stunned into silence. Their entire world had been dismantled in under an hour. As we were packing our briefcases, Uncle James came forward. He didn't say a word. He just put a firm hand on my shoulder and squeezed. It was all he needed to say. Sophia and Derek hugged me, their faces beaming with relief. I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. The war wasn't completely over, but the decisive battle had been won. The next few days were about securing the perimeter, building a fortress around my grandmother that my parents could never breach again. The first step was practical. The court order gave me legal authority over her finances, which meant I could finally see the full extent of the damage. It was worse than I thought. They had bled her accounts for nearly $500,000 over 3 years. The money was gone, vanished into luxury vacations, expensive cars, and Ethan's non-existent business. The second step was more symbolic, but just as important. With Grandma Martha's tearful blessing, we put her condo on the market. It held too many bad memories, too many ghosts of my father's manipulative visits. She needed a fresh start, a place where she felt safe. I found a beautiful, sunny 2-bedroom apartment in a modern building with a doorman and good security, just 10 minutes from my own place. The most crucial step, however, was the one Howard and I took the following week. We sat down with a trust and estate specialist to create what Howard called the ultimate firewall. We established the Martha Mitchell Irrevocable Trust. Here's what this does, Howard explained, pointing to a diagram he'd drawn on a legal pad. We transfer all of Martha's remaining assets, the proceeds from the condo sale, her stocks, her savings, into this trust. You will be the investment advisor, but an independent, licensed fiduciary, a professional trustee from the bank, will be the legal administrator. They will be responsible for managing the funds and paying her bills. What does that mean for my parents? I asked. It means they can never touch it, Howard said with a grim smile. An irrevocable trust is like a legal vault. To get anything out of it, they would have to sue the trust itself. And since the trust's sole legal purpose is to provide for Martha's welfare for the rest of her life, a judge would laugh them out of court. They have been legally and permanently cut off. It was a brilliant move. It protected my grandmother, and it also protected me. It removed me from the direct line of fire. I wasn't the one signing the checks. A professional, neutral third party was. It would be impossible for my parents to ever again accuse me of managing her money for my own benefit. The day we signed the papers at the bank was quiet and momentous. Grandma Martha sat between us, her back straight, her hands steady as she signed her name on the thick stack of documents. When she was done, she looked up at me, her eyes clear. "Thank you, Alex," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me my peace of mind back." That evening, I helped her move the last of her boxes into her new apartment. It was filled with light, and from her balcony, you could see the Charles River. We ordered pizza and ate it out of the box, sitting on her new sofa. She seemed lighter, younger even, than I had seen her in years. She was free. As I was leaving, she pulled me into a hug. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," she whispered. "He always said you had the kindest heart and the strongest spine of anyone in this family." He was right. Walking home that night, I felt the heavy weight I had been carrying for months finally begin to lift. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about that moment. It was about restoring the dignity of the one person who had always championed mine. The tides had truly shifted, and for the first time in a long time, the water was calm. The next few months were about building, not just a legal case but a life. The court-appointed accountant relentlessly clawed back what he could from my parents. They were forced to sell their new Mercedes. Their social life had evaporated. They were pariahs in a community that valued image above all else. The house, the Great Mitchell estate, was put up for sale by the court to begin repaying the $500,000 they had stolen from the trust. Their downfall was as quiet and complete as their arrogance had once been loud. But I didn't dwell on it. My focus was on the future. My experience with my grandmother's finances had lit a fire in me. I saw how vulnerable the elderly were, how easily they could be exploited, even by their own family. My double major in finance and computer science suddenly felt less like a hobby and more like a calling. I spent my nights not in bars or at parties, but in front of my laptop, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I started developing a software concept, a system that could be linked to a senior's bank and investment accounts. It would use machine learning to learn their normal spending habits. Then it would flag any unusual activity, a large sudden withdrawal, a new recurring payment to an unknown entity, an attempt to change account ownership online, and send an instant alert to a designated trusted contact like a child, a lawyer, or a caregiver. It was a digital watchdog, a shield. I called it Elder Shield. When I had a working prototype, I called Uncle James. I didn't ask for a job. I asked for a meeting. We met at his tech firm's sleek downtown office. I was nervous, my hands sweating as I set up my laptop. I walked him through the business plan, the market research, and then I showed him the demo. I created a fake account for Martha, and then initiated a large, unusual wire transfer. A second later, a red alert flashed on the screen, with a text message being sent to a designated phone. He was silent for a long time after I finished, just looking at the screen. I thought he was going to dismiss it as a niche project. "My father," he said finally, his voice quiet. "My own father." Towards the end, he had a companion who convinced him to invest in a real estate deal in Florida. He lost over $100,000 before we found out. This could have stopped that. He looked at me not as a nephew but as a founder. "How much do you need for seed funding?" That was the start. Uncle James became my first investor. Howard Winters, seeing the value immediately, started referring the software to his clients who were dealing with estate planning. The business wasn't an overnight success. It was a grueling uphill battle. There were bugs to fix, late nights spent coding, and rejections from banks who were slow to adopt new technologies. But it was mine. It was real. And it was helping people. While I was building my future, Ethan was trying to reckon with his past. After the hearing, he had truly hit rock bottom. With the family accounts frozen, he was completely cut off. He had to drop out of college and move into a tiny, shared apartment with a couple of guys from his old football team. For the first time in his life, he had to work. He got a job at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The hours were long. The work was grueling. Loading and unloading trucks, rain or shine. It was a world away from the country club and the Mustang. About a month after the hearing, he called me. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. "Hey," he said. I was wondering if I could see Grandma." I was hesitant, but I heard something in his voice. A genuine need for connection, not a request for a handout. "She'd like that, Ethan," I said. He started visiting her every Sunday. He didn't ask her for anything. He would just sit with her, listen to her stories, help her with her groceries, and sometimes they would just watch old movies together. He was getting to know her not as a source of funding but as a person, as his grandmother. One afternoon he called me again. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "For everything. For how I treated you. For being a stupid, arrogant jerk. For not seeing what was happening. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited my whole life to hear. And when it came, it wasn't about me winning. It was about him finally understanding. "I know, Ethan," I said. "Me too." The wall between us, the one our parents had so carefully constructed, finally came down. Our relationship didn't magically fix itself overnight. It was a slow, awkward process, but it was a start. He enrolled in community college at night, studying to be a paralegal. He said he wanted to understand the laws that had so completely upended his world. A few months later, he tentatively asked if there were any odd jobs at ElderShield. I gave him a part-time position doing data entry and customer support testing. It wasn't glamorous, but he did it without complaint. He was earning his place step by step. One evening, I was working late at my small, rented office space. Ethan was in the next room quietly inputting data. My phone buzzed. It was an email with the subject line, "First contract signed." A mid-sized regional bank in Ohio had agreed to pilot ElderShield for their high-net-worth senior clients. It was our first real corporate client, a major milestone. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. I looked through the glass partition at my brother, who was diligently working away. I thought about my grandmother, safe in her new apartment. I thought about the hard, painful road it had taken to get here. We weren't the Mitchell family my father had envisioned. We were something new, something stronger, something built not on a name or a house, but on a foundation of respect, forgiveness, and hard-won truth. The celebration wasn't at a fancy restaurant like Bellamy's. It was in my apartment, the one I could finally afford without waiting tables. The guest list was small. Me, Sophia, who was now my fiancée, my grandmother, Uncle James, and Ethan. We were celebrating the Ohio bank contract. Uncle James brought a bottle of champagne that cost more than my first month's rent used to. He raised his glass. "To Alex," he said, his voice full of genuine pride, "who showed us all what it means to have a spine. And to ElderShield, a company that does well by doing good." We all clinked glasses. My grandmother, her eyes sparkling, raised her own glass of sparkling cider. "I want to make a toast, too," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To my grandson, Alex. You didn't just protect me. You're using what happened to us to protect thousands of other people you'll never even meet. You turned our family's greatest shame into your greatest strength. I am prouder of you than words can say." Tears pricked my eyes. Her validation was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table. Then Ethan, who had been quiet most of the evening, lifted his glass. He looked directly at me, his eyes clear of the shadows that had haunted them for so long. "I'd like to toast," he said, his voice steady, "to second chances." Our eyes met across the table. It was more than an apology. It was an acknowledgement, promise. We weren't just brothers by blood anymore. We were starting to become friends, bound by a shared, painful history and the tentative hope of a better future. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was standing on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights, I thought about that cream-colored envelope. Felt like a lifetime ago. I had thought of it as a weapon, a tool for justice and revenge. But it had been something more. It had been a key. It had unlocked a door, not just out of a toxic family, but into a life of purpose. It had forced me to define myself by my own actions, not by my father's expectations. A few weeks ago, a reporter from a tech journal interviewed me about ElderShield. He asked what drove me to create it. I didn't tell him the whole messy story. I just told him the truth that mattered. Sometimes people get so focused on what they want that they're willing to hurt the people they're supposed to protect. I said, I wanted to create a system that acts as a voice for those who might not be heard, a shield for those who can't always shield themselves. The man who was once the disappointing son, the outcast, the one who wasn't part of the family, had found his place. Not by trying to fit in, but by daring to stand out. My name is Alex Mitchell. I'm not defined by the family that tried to throw me away. I'm defined by the one I built in its place, and the work I do every day to make sure no one else has to go through what my grandmother did. The cost was high, but the peace I found was priceless. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.